He can't play at all. And when Graeme Souness said those words, you knew there was real venom behind them. Souness never did things by halves, and his ability to hold a grudge against players he hated became legendary in football. Throughout his career as both a player and manager, there were 5 men who truly got under his skin, and the stories of these feuds reveal a darker side to one of Britain's most celebrated footballers. Before we dive into the chaos, it's worth remembering that Souness was an exceptional talent. As a player, he won 5 league titles and 3 European Cups with Liverpool, captaining one of the greatest sides English football has ever seen. But success came with an edge that would later define his managerial career in all the wrong ways. The first grudge began at Liverpool itself, with a man who should have been his ally. In 1981, manager Bob Paisley made a decision that would spark decades of hatred. He stripped Phil Thompson of the captaincy and handed the armband to Souness instead. Thompson felt robbed, believing Souness had stolen something that rightfully belonged to him. What started as professional resentment quickly became personal. Thompson made deeply hurtful remarks about Souness's first wife, crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. The two men came to loathe each other with an intensity that time only seemed to strengthen. Years later, when Souness returned to Liverpool as manager, he finally got his revenge. He sacked Thompson from the coaching staff, settling a score that had been brewing for over a decade. It was cold, calculated, and absolutely deliberate. But Thompson wasn't alone in feeling the force of Souness's uncompromising nature. As a manager at Rangers between 1986 and 1991, Souness himself later admitted he bordered on being out of order, describing his own behaviour as obnoxious and difficult to deal with. This wasn't false modesty. Souness had built his playing reputation on physical dominance. During the 1984 European Cup semi-final, he openly bragged about delivering what he called the best punch of his life, breaking an opponent's jaw. That willingness to use violence didn't disappear when he swapped his boots for a suit and clipboard. If anything, it became the foundation of his managerial philosophy. Before we move on, take a second to subscribe and hit that bell icon. What do you think makes a good manager? Fear or respect? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this story is about to get even more intense. By the time Souness moved to Blackburn Rovers, his methods had been tested across multiple clubs, and cracks were beginning to show. At Blackburn, he enjoyed genuine success, winning promotion and the League Cup in 2002. He worked effectively with talented young players like Damien Duff and David Dunn, and he brought in experienced strikers like Andy Cole. But beneath the silverware, there was constant friction. Souness fell out with a long list of players, and one conflict in particular exposed just how far his confrontational style had gone. Andrew Cole, the prolific striker, found himself in an increasingly toxic relationship with his manager. Cole believed he was being singled out for unfair treatment. He was denied days off, missed a team flight to Spain, and felt victimized at every turn. The dispute became so serious that the Professional Footballers Association had to step in to mediate. This wasn't just about a manager and a player having a disagreement. It was about employment rights, contractual fairness, and a complete breakdown in trust. The fact that a union had to intervene showed that Souness's hardline approach was no longer just tough. It was potentially unlawful. His methods were incompatible with the modern game's rising standards of professionalism and accountability. Souness's handling of David Dunn at Blackburn revealed another side to his ruthlessness. Dunn was publicly criticised for his attitude, with Souness questioning his commitment in training and citing daft injuries. The manager placed him on the transfer list, but later admitted this was a carefully calculated move, designed to provoke a reaction. Souness openly said he didn't care if Dunn pulled faces behind his back or called him names, as long as the player performed on the pitch. He was willing to sacrifice any positive relationship for short-term results. Respect, in Souness's world, came from fear and pressure, not mutual trust. But it was at Newcastle United where Souness's managerial approach truly imploded. Appointed in September 2004 to replace the beloved Sir Bobby Robson, Souness was brought in to restore discipline. Instead, his 18-month tenure became a masterclass in how not to manage a football club. Commentators widely agree that Souness completely destroyed the good atmosphere Robson had created, setting Newcastle on a path towards years of chaos and underachievement. One of Souness's earliest disciplinary challenges at Newcastle involved Kieran Dyer. Just days into the job, Dyer was caught on CCTV urinating in an alleyway and had to attend a police station to receive a caution. Souness drove him home afterwards, and instead of issuing a standard fine or warning, he bypassed all normal procedures. In the car, Souness turned to Dyer and delivered a chilling threat. "If you ever do anything like this again, I will bin you," he said. Then he added, "If I ever have to come to a police station again, I will beat you up." Dyer later confirmed he kept his mouth shut because he knew Souness wasn't messing around. This wasn't just tough management, it was a manager threatening physical violence to control a player's behaviour. The most explosive confrontation of Souness's career came with Welsh striker Craig Bellamy. During a match against Charlton, Souness substituted Bellamy, and television cameras caught the striker muttering a crude insult in the manager's direction as he walked off. When Souness saw the footage, he was furious. The next morning, he called a squad meeting and publicly humiliated Bellamy in front of his teammates, referring to him with a vulgar insult. Then Souness grabbed Bellamy by the throat. He challenged the player to a physical fight, demanding they sort it out like men in the gym. Only the intervention of Captain Alan Shearer, who physically restrained Souness, prevented an all-out brawl. Chairman Freddie Shepherd immediately instructed agents to engineer Bellamy's exit, confirming the player had played his last game for Newcastle. The incident was a public relations disaster and a damning indictment of Souness's inability to manage conflict without resorting to violence. The chaos Souness cultivated reached its peak in April 2005 during a match against Aston Villa. Newcastle were already losing 3-0 when teammates Lee Bowyer and Kieran Dyer started fighting each other on the pitch. Both were sent off, leaving Newcastle to finish the match with 9 men. It was a global embarrassment, broadcast live to millions. In the dressing room afterwards, Souness was described as flint-faced and traumatic. His response to this ultimate public display of indiscipline was to offer to fight both Bowyer and Dyer simultaneously. Bowyer received a 7-game ban from the FA, a £30,000 fine, and a club fine of 6 weeks' wages, estimated at around £200,000. Souness's final act of challenging his own players to a fight underscored just how dysfunctional his management had become. Souness inherited a Newcastle side that had been challenging for the Champions League under Robson. Despite spending close to £50 million on new players during his reign, he was unable to stabilise the team. The constant internal conflict alienated key talents like Bellamy and Cole, turning what had been a vibrant squad into a struggling mid-table side. By February 2006, with Newcastle sitting 15th in the Premier League table, Souness was sacked. It was a spectacular failure that confirmed one harsh truth: massive financial investment cannot overcome a toxic internal culture driven by extreme man-management methods. Since leaving Newcastle, Souness has repeatedly described the job as horrible and the worst of his career. He blamed the difficulties on having to answer to people upstairs who, in his view, should have been below him. But the evidence tells a different story. Souness created the chaos himself. His reliance on physical threats with Dyer and Bellamy, and his legally questionable disciplinary actions with Cole that required union intervention, forced the club hierarchy to constantly intervene. He cultivated the toxic environment that made his job unbearable, then blamed everyone else for the consequences. The inflexibility and confrontation that defined his playing days proved utterly incompatible with modern football management. Looking back at these 5 feuds, with Phil Thompson, Andrew Cole, Kieran Dyer, Craig Bellamy, and Lee Bowyer and Dyer together, a clear pattern emerges. Souness managed through fear and dominance, with zero tolerance for perceived disrespect. His responses ranged from calculated psychological pressure with Dunn to institutional action with Cole and Thompson, and outright physical threats with Dyer and Bellamy. While this approach may have worked in the less scrutinized environments of the past, it proved disastrous in the modern, high-profile world of Premier League football. Today, Souness is a television pundit known for his strong and controversial opinions. In many ways, his media persona is a direct continuation of the divisive figure he was in the dressing room. His failure at Newcastle United serves as a powerful cautionary tale, demonstrating that managerial inflexibility and a reliance on the hard man mentality were completely at odds with sustained success in contemporary professional football. Despite all the chaos and controversy, Souness remains a football legend whose playing achievements can never be taken away. His 5 league titles and 3 European Cups speak to a brilliance that was undeniable. But his managerial legacy tells a different story, one of grudges held too long, conflicts escalated too far, and a refusal to adapt that ultimately cost him the respect he so desperately sought to command through fear.
I heard that it was going to be a charitable game for Wayne's Foundation. I thought, fantastic, really good. Wayne playing in the States.
Yeah. As I say, you're never sure, because I've never experienced anything like that. And I have regular checks with my union.
Stuart Pearce was a player that many opponents and even teammates absolutely hated. His famous nickname Psycho was celebrated by fans. They saw it as passion, commitment and raw emotion. That visceral roar at Euro 96 became the defining image of his career. The ferocious tackles and the never say die attitude made him a hero. He was the ultimate warrior. But this Psycho moniker was not just a badge of honor, it was a default setting of in-your-face aggression. This fury was not simple passion, it was complex and volatile. It was a trait that led to a career defined by damaging and high-profile conflicts. His aggression did not fade when he hung up his boots. It followed him into management. It poisoned relationships. It destroyed careers. We are going to investigate this psycho spectrum by examining 6 key case files. These are 6 men who were on the receiving end of this aggression. We will start with the players he failed as a manager. Danny Mills was a senior defender at Manchester City. Stuart Pearce was his manager. The relationship between them broke down completely. This breakdown was not quiet. It was public, personal, and devastating. It serves as a foundational case study in Pearce's authoritarian managerial style. The feud began over a fitness dispute. Mills was recovering from a broken leg. The injury was serious. Pearce's own comments confirmed it. He said Mills broke his leg. Scans discovered a hairline fracture. Yet Pearce wanted him to play after only 3 days of training. Mills, a 37-year-old veteran, said he was not ready. According to Mills, Pearce delivered an immediate ultimatum. He told Mills, "You'll never play for me again," and that was the end of it. It's a shocking way to treat a senior player. Do you think a manager should ever speak to a player like that? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this look into football's biggest feuds, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Mills was exiled from the team. He was eventually sent on loan to Hull City. He did not stay quiet. He became a vocal and devastating critic of Pearce's management. Mills launched a comprehensive public critique. He spoke to BBC Radio 5 Live and Final Score. His accusations were not vague. They were specific and targeted. They attacked the core of Pearce's professional competence. Mills said, "Tactically, I don't think he's very good. Motivationally, I think he's poor." He added that Pearce doesn't have the depth of football ability to back it up. As a specific and humiliating example, Mills cited Pearce's decision to put goalkeeper David James up front in a desperate search for a goal. Mills also said Pearce is not a great coach. He's not a great tactician. He's not a great motivator. He suggested Pearce's impact was superficial and temporary. He has this massive impact when he goes in because of his stature, Mills said, and he doesn't always have the substance to back that up. The most critical accusation was about Pearce's inability to manage senior players. Mills claimed Pearce struggles with big players who question his authority. This was the key to the entire feud. Mills himself admitted, "I did question 1 or 2 of the manager's decisions. The team's form had collapsed. They were losing 10 out of their last 11 games." Pearce's public handling of the situation revealed a significant contradiction. While he was allegedly telling Mills privately that his career at the club was over, his public comments were very different. He told the press that Mills must fight as hard as he can to get back into the starting lineup. He said Mills had the same chance as anyone else. He even praised him as a decent professional. This public stance was completely completely at odds with Mills's claims. When pressed on Mills's criticisms, Pearce's true feelings came out. He made a sarcastic jab that confirmed the dispute was personal. He said,
"I do apologise for putting Micah Richards in Mills's place at Manchester City. This feud creates a perfect self-fulfilling prophecy. Mills's core accusation was that Pearce struggles with big players who question his authority. This was proven by Pearce's vindictive reaction to that very questioning. The dispute over authority was the cause of the conflict. The devastating public critique of Pearce's tactics was the result. Pearce's authoritarian default setting created the very enemy who would most effectively articulate his failings to the world. The conflict with Joey Barton provides a near identical replication of the pattern established with Danny Mills. It reinforces the thesis that Pearce's man management style, when challenged by a big player, was not to manage but to excommunicate. The relationship between Pearce and Barton deteriorated publicly. The flashpoint was Barton's training ground assault on teammate Ousmane Darboe. This led to Barton's suspension and eventual sale to Newcastle United. As with Mills, Barton's primary grievance was not the consequence itself, it was the manner in which Pearce handled the fallout. Barton felt Pearce had violated the professional code by speaking publicly about an internal matter. Barton stated, "We had a relationship breakdown and Stuart Pearce came out and said certain things which he shouldn't have said, whether he felt them or not." Barton's position was clear. When you have a working relationship with someone, there's a lot of things that should be kept in-house. Stuart thinks different. Barton's complaint was validated by Pearce's own public declaration. In breaching the in-house code, Pearce did not simply express disappointment, he delivered a definitive, absolute and public statement of excommunication. Pearce insisted that Barton will never play for a team of mine again. This quote is the smoking gun of a behavioural pattern. This phrase, "never play for me or a team of mine again," is functionally identical to the ultimatum Danny Mills alleges he received in private. This verbal tick represents Pearce's managerial kill switch. It is a non-negotiable, permanent, and, in Barton's case, public termination of the professional relationship. This pattern proves that Pearce's management style for complex or challenging personalities was not management at all. It was removal. When faced with a crisis or a challenge to his authority, Pearce's psycho default manifested as an authoritarian kill switch, publicly and permanently severing ties. The infamous confrontation with French defender Basile Boli during Euro '92 provides one of the clearest windows into the psycho persona. It demonstrates that Pearce's aggression was not always mindless rage. Instead, it could be calculated, strategic, and psychologically manipulative. The incident was in fact a three-part cycle of escalating aggression, a cycle that Pearce himself initiated. The first act was a crunching challenge from Pearce on French player Jocelyn Anglemar. In direct retaliation for this challenge, Basile Boli flattened Stuart Pearce. He headbutted him as they jostled at a corner. The violent conduct left Pearce with blood streaming down his face and a bloody cheek. The third act was Pearce's revenge. It is the nature of this revenge that is most revealing. It was not a simple, impulsive act of violence against his attacker. It was a cold, two-pronged response. The physical response was channeled. When England was awarded a free kick minutes later, Pearce unleashed all his rage on the ball. He smashed it against the post or crossbar. The psychological response, however, was far darker. Pearce knew he wouldn't get near Boli again. Therefore, he took matters into his own hands and deliberately targeted the innocent Jocelyn Anglemar, the player he had originally fouled. Pearce accused his opposite winger, rather than Boli, of the attack to put him on the back foot. Pearce later recounted the chilling words he delivered to the terrified Anglemar. Pointing to the cut on his bleeding cheek, he said, "You done that, and I'm going to sort you out for doing it." Pearce admitted that Anglemar, who was in sheer terror, protested his innocence, but Pearce didn't care. The threat was effective. Anglemar was busy for the next 20 minutes denying it was him. This incident provides a definitive portrait of the intelligence behind the psycho persona. Pearce weaponized his own victimhood. Under the guise of red mist, he executed a cold, strategic, and deeply manipulative act of psychological warfare, terrorizing an innocent opponent for strategic gain. The 1994 incident in which Pearce made a racist remark to Paul Ince reveals a profound contradiction in his character. The original incident occurred in December 1994 during a Premier League match between Pearce's Nottingham Forest and Ince's Manchester United. Pearce allegedly made racist comments to Ince, an England international colleague. At the time, the incident was not ignored. Gordon Taylor, the chief executive of the Professional Footballers Association, was involved in resolving the issue originally. Taylor spoke to Pearce, who regrets what he said. This apology was duly offered and accepted. As one report summarised, it happened 18 years ago, was in the news 18 years ago, Pearce apologised 18 years ago, Ince accepted the apology 18 years ago. The issue was dredged up nearly 2 decades later, in 2012, when Pearce was appointed as England's caretaker manager. Pearce's 2012 reaction to this resurfacing is a case study in public relations deflection. He expressed no fresh contrition for the act itself. Instead, he focused his criticism on the media for bringing it up. He stated, "In some ways, I found it a little bit sad to rehash a story from 17 years ago." He framed both himself and Ince as mutual victims of the press. He said,
"I felt sorry for Paul because I know him and his family would have been chased for comments as well." This response skillfully reframed the narrative. It positioned Pearce not as the perpetrator of a racist remark, but as a victim of an opportunistic and sad media cycle. In 2012, Pearce was defended by former teammate Paul Parker. Parker argued the comments would have come out of ignorance, not bigotry. However, in the same breath, Parker offered a counterexample that creates a profound and negative contradiction. Parker recalled a separate incident while playing for England, where an opponent said something racist to Des Walker. According to Parker, the first person to stand up for Des was Stuart. He let this guy know exactly what he thought of him. This defense, intended to be exculpatory, is instead deeply damning. If Pearce was aware enough of racism's toxicity to stand up for Des Walker, his own use of a racist remark against Paul Ince cannot be dismissed as simple ignorance. It suggests the racial slur was deployed as just another weapon in his arsenal of aggression, used to wound an opponent just as he would use a scything tackle. The rivalry between Stuart Pearce and Graeme Souness for the England left-back position appears to be the great exception to the rule. However, a deeper analysis reveals it to be a control case. Pearce's professionalism in this single instance provides the final, crucial piece of evidence needed to understand his confrontational nature. When Terry Venables took over as England manager in 1994, he swept a new broom. Venables identified Blackburn Rovers' Graeme Souness as his first choice. In one of his first phone calls to Pearce, Venables was direct. He said, "Souness is going to be my left-back." This was a direct challenge to Pearce's status. Yet his response was a model of complete professionalism. Instead of reacting with anger or ego, Pearce told Venables, "Fine, but if you think I'm good enough, I'll stay with the squad and help him." This professionalism culminated in a significant symbolic act. In what Souness later described as a small training ground ceremony, Pearce personally presented Souness with the number 3 shirt before his debut. Souness stated that, "Pearce told me that I deserved it on merit, and he was really gracious." Pearce dutifully sat on the bench and watched Souness play until December 1995, when fate intervened. Souness suffered a catastrophic injury, a broken leg and dislocated ankle. Pearce, given his opportunity, made the most of it and went on to have his iconic, redemptive tournament. This incident seems to contradict the negative thesis of a career defined by conflict. It doesn't. It reinforces it. Pearce's professionalism with Souness serves as the control case that proves his authoritarian meltdowns with Mills and Barton were choices, not inevitabilities. The critical question is why his reactions were so different. The answer lies in the source of the challenge. With Souness, the decision came from above, from the manager, Terry Venables. This was an authority Pearce respected and was institutionally bound to accept. With Mills and Barton, the challenges came from below, from subordinate players. This distinction is crucial. It proves Pearce was capable of handling professional disappointment with grace and professionalism. His inability to do so with Mills and Barton is therefore an even more damning indictment. It was not a lack of ability to be professional, it was a lack of willingness. The infamous incident involving Derby County's Ted McMinn is perhaps the purest, most unfiltered, and most bizarre example of the psycho default in action. It provides a glimpse into the primal end of the psycho spectrum. The incident occurred during the famously heated East Midlands derby between Nottingham Forest and Derby County. In one such encounter, Pearce clattered into Ted McMinn. As the two players lay in a heap on the floor, Pearce committed the notorious act. This is not a matter of media legend or speculation. It is anchored by Pearce's own reported admission. As one report bluntly states, "I bit him right on the nipple." This was the default setting of in-your-face aggression, manifesting in a primal, shocking, and indefensible physical assault. Like the Bowley incident, this aggression did not exist in a vacuum. It created lingering bad blood. More importantly, it initiated a self-sustaining cycle of violence, of which Pearce was the sole architect. Pearce knew his action would have a consequence. He knew that McMinn was likely to seek revenge when the two teams met again at the start of the 1989-1990 campaign. His solution was not to defuse the situation, but to escalate it preemptively. Pearce decided to get his retaliation in first by scything the Derby player virtually in two. This creates a perfect negative narrative loop. Pearce commits a bizarre
bizarre and aggressive act, the bite. He then uses the assumed future consequence of his own action as justification for a new act of aggression, the scything tackle. He is the sole creator and perpetrator of this entire cycle. This incident reveals the psycho default in its purest and most indefensible form. The 6 case files presented, when synthesized, form an undeniable and career-long pattern of behavior. These are not a series of isolated, coincidental, or heat-of-the-moment events. They are the consistent, predictable outcomes of a single, unifying default setting of aggression, a psycho spectrum that defined Stuart Pearce's career. The analysis confirms the negative thesis. The aggression manifested in every conceivable arena. The bite on Ted McMinn stands as the baseline, a raw, physical, and bizarre act. The calculated, psychological terrorizing of the innocent Jocelyn Anglemer proves the psycho persona was an intelligent, manipulative, and cold-blooded tool. The 1994 racist remark to Paul Ince demonstrates that when the default setting was triggered,
Even deeply held principles could be overridden, and a racial slur deployed as a weapon. The feuds with Danny Mills and Joey Barton show how this psycho default translated directly into a failed management style. The kill switch phrase, "never play for me again," is the administrative equivalent of a scything tackle, an absolute punitive and destructive act that brooks no dissent. The Graeme Souness case serves as the final damning piece of evidence. It proves that Pearce's professionalism was entirely contingent. He was capable of grace when his position was challenged by a respected superior, but that professionalism vanished, replaced by the psycho default the moment his personal authority was questioned by a subordinate. Ultimately, the psycho persona was not a simple badge of a hard man. It was a complex, multifaceted, and destructive default setting that defined one of football's most controversial and damaging careers.
The agreement was done very amicably with the FA. Apologise to those. Very best.
Was that your last job in football then?
Who knows? We'll wait and see. Thanks, lad. And playing forward and quicker. All this tippy-tappy stuff everybody keeps going about the right way to play football is all a lot of sometimes.
July 2016. Sam Allardyce had finally achieved what he called his dream job. After decades in football management, he was appointed manager of the England national team, the pinnacle of his career. Job he'd always believed he deserved. 67 days later, it was over. A single match. One game in charge of his country, and then humiliation. The shortest tenure of any permanent England manager in history. But this wasn't a tragedy. This wasn't bad luck. This was inevitable. Catalyst was a secretly recorded meeting. Undercover journalists from the Daily Telegraph, posing as businessmen from a fictitious Far East firm, caught England's manager on camera. What they captured was damning. Allardyce, negotiating a £400,000 speaking deal. Allardyce, explaining how to get around the Football Association's rules on third-party ownership of players. Very rules his employer was trying to enforce. Within 24 hours of the story breaking, he was gone. Mutual agreement, they called it. But everyone knew what it meant. His defence was predictable. He'd been a fool, yes, but also a victim. Entrapment, he claimed. Press had set him up. But the official rulings told a different story. Press regulator investigated and concluded the Telegraph's undercover tactics were justified. The findings, they said, demonstrated sufficiently serious impropriety, and while Allardyce hadn't technically broken any laws, he had shown something perhaps more revealing, a disregard for the rules. Not breaking them outright, but skirting them, operating in the grey areas, maintaining just enough distance to claim innocence. This concept of disregard for the spirit of rules while avoiding the letter of the law, this would turn out to be the defining characteristic of his entire career. But there was a detail in the Telegraph investigation that most people missed. A detail that linked this scandal to a much longer pattern. Allardyce wasn't alone at that meeting. Sitting beside him was his agent, his longtime associate, Mark Curtis. For decades, Curtis had been at the centre of allegations surrounding Allardyce. Multiple players, spanning years, had come forward with remarkably similar stories. Stories of pressure, stories of coercion, stories of a manager using his power to push young, vulnerable players toward one specific agent. Ravel Morrison was one of them, a prodigious talent at West Ham, volatile and troubled, but undeniably gifted. Morrison alleged that Allardyce and his captain Kevin Nolan put him under considerable pressure to sign with Mark Curtis. Daily pressure, he said, almost every day. He wanted to go into training to learn, to improve. Instead, he faced endless conversations about an agent he didn't want to employ. Allardyce denied it. called it completely unfounded. Nonsense. But Morrison's complaint wasn't isolated. Journalists noted a fairly astounding pattern of players from Allardyce teams signing with Curtis, and there was something particularly calculated about the Morrison case. The pressure didn't just come from the manager, it came from the captain too. Kevin Nolan, Allardyce's trusted lieutenant on the pitch, was himself a client of Mark Curtis. Created a pincer movement, the boss applying pressure from above, the dressing room leader applying it from within. For a young player, already struggling with personal issues, it was an impossible position. But Morrison wasn't the first. 15 years earlier, there was Kevin Kilbane, 20-year-old at Preston North End, who just received his first international call-up for Ireland. Allardyce, a former coach at the club, reached out, suggested the young player meet with Curtis. By his own admission, still very much in awe of Big Sam. Part of him didn't want to let Big Sam down. Allardyce arranged a meeting at a hotel. Curtis arrived with a pre-written contract. He expected Kilbane to sign there and then, but something didn't feel right. Kilbane refused. Look at the pattern. Both players were in their early 20s. Both were at critical inflection points in their careers. Kilbane at his first international call-up, naive and in awe. During a period of famed personal instability, described as wayward with a dodgy background. Strategy appears predatory. Identify young, impressionable players. Target them at vulnerable moments. Exploit that vulnerability, whether it's naivety or personal chaos, and channel them toward a preferred agent. This wasn't just about Curtis. A decade before the Telegraph sting, there was another investigation, another undercover operation, this time BBC Panorama. The programme was called Football's Dirty Secrets. Sam Allardyce was at its centre. The allegation was simple and serious. Allardyce, then manager of Bolton Wanderers, had accepted bribes, what they called bungs, from agents in exchange for signing certain players. But as always, mechanism involved a proxy, this time not Mark Curtis. This time, his own son. Craig Allardyce was a football agent. The agents were secretly filmed claiming they'd paid Sam Allardyce indirectly, channeling money through Craig. Specific transfers were flagged. Tal Ben Haim, Hidetoshi Nakata, Ali Al-Habsi. In some cases, Craig had been contractually banned from participating in Bolton deals, continued to operate anyway. The conflict of interest was glaring. Allardyce's response: indignation, outrage. He announced he was planning to sue the BBC over false and highly damaging allegations. The threat of a lawsuit was loudly broadcast. The lawsuit never came. He later claimed it would cost too much money and take too long. Allegations, as a result, remain legally unchallenged to this day. The Football Association commissioned an official inquiry, the Stevens Report, and once again, the finding was familiar. No evidence of irregular payments made directly to Sam Allardyce. Appeared on a technicality, the report explicitly stated it remained concerned about the conflict of interest that existed between Craig Allardyce, his father, Sam Allardyce, and the club itself. He wasn't found guilty of taking a bung, but he was officially cited for creating the very structure that allowed such allegations to flourish. He had set up his professional life in a way that invited suspicion, using his own son as an agent for his club's transfers. The parallels between 2006 and 2016 possible to ignore. Same pattern, operating through a trusted proxy. First the son, then the long-time agent. Same defence. Public bluster, threats of legal action that never materialise. Same outcome, cleared of the specific crime, but officially censured for the conflict of interest or the disregard for rules. It wasn't just agents and ethics. Allardyce's relationships with his own players followed a pattern too, a combustible cycle. Public support, followed by bitter fallout. Paternalism that flipped to authoritarianism the moment loyalty was broken. El Hadji Diouf is the perfect example. One of the most reviled players of his generation, spitting at opponents, clashing with teammates, allegedly racially abusing a ball boy, but Allardyce defended him relentlessly. When Diouf was charged by the FA for spitting, Allardyce warned him his career could be at stake, then immediately promised all the support he needs. When racism allegations emerged, Allardyce declared him innocent. He claimed to get the best out of Diouf because he commanded his respect. He even used Diouf to attack a rival, claiming Liverpool had failed the player. "We looked after him at Bolton," Allardyce said. "He was left on his own in a strange country. Liverpool slipped up. This cultivated an image, the only manager who understood the troubled star. Privately, Allardyce acknowledged Diouf's self-destructive streak, that he changes during games. The loyalty, it turns out, was conditional. Once their professional relationship ended, protection vanished. Diouf became highly critical of his former mentor, claiming Allardyce was too old, past it, tactically outdated. The same cycle played out with Joey Barton at Newcastle. Allardyce staked his reputation on signing the controversial midfielder for £5.8 million. He personally had to convince the board that he could deal with Barton's notorious off-field issues. This was paternalistic Allardyce, gambling his credibility on his ability to tame a troubled asset. The betrayal came when Barton was arrested in late 2007 for an early morning assault in Liverpool. Allardyce, whose reputation was on the line, reportedly infuriated, admitted feeling let down. Though Barton publicly apologised, the relationship was irrevocably fractured. Barton would go on to become one of Allardyce's most vocal critics, mocking his dinosaur tactics, his long ball methods, his ego. These weren't stories of paternal guidance, but transactional relationships. The defence of troubled players was really a validation of Allardyce's own judgment and man-management genius. The moment that asset became a liability, or worse, a dissenter, the paternalistic protection was withdrawn, and the ultimate sin wasn't off-field trouble. Allardyce had proven he could manage that. The unforgivable sin was ideological dissent, attacking his footballing philosophy. That was a betrayal he couldn't forgive, because Allardyce's conflicts with players who questioned his methods were really a microcosm of his career-long war with the wider footballing world. He cultivated a public persona as the ultimate pragmatist, an identity defined almost entirely in opposition to what he called the philosophers and intellectuals of the game. His tactical style had been the subject of relentless criticism. Direct dinosaur tactics, hoofballs. The most famous jibe came from Jose Mourinho, who after a 0-0 draw in 2014 described Allardyce's West Ham tactics as football from the 19th century. Even Sir Bobby Robson, a revered figure and one of his predecessors at Newcastle, publicly criticised his style, urging him to trust his flair players and play along the deck. Allardyce's defence was a combination of grandiose self-promotion and bitter grievance. He repeatedly claimed his reputation for long-ball football was not founded in fact, and was merely an excuse used by sore losers. His most famous quote served as his thesis. "I would be more suited to Internazionale or Real Madrid. I have always played to the strengths of my squad." In his autobiography, he cemented this grievance, complaining of intellectual snobbery. They hit a 50-yard ball, it was a cultural pass. When we did it, it was a hopeful hoof. This ideological resentment fueled his most personal feuds. The animosity between Allardyce and Rafael Benitez was a decade-long war of words, described by some as poisonous. The feud's origin was purely tactical. It began in 2004 with what Benitez called his Welcome to England game, a 1-0 loss for his Liverpool side against Allardyce's physically dominant Bolton. From there, it escalated into a war of philosophies. Allardyce, in his autobiography, launched a direct attack on Benitez's greatest tactical triumph, 2005 Champions League final comeback in Istanbul. It had naught to do with Benitez, Allardyce claimed, all about Steven Gerrard. Benitez's retort was famously dismissive and aimed directly at Allardyce's perceived status. Do you know who Sam Allardyce is? Do you know how many trophies he has won? Well, that's my answer. Opinion does not have a lot of value. A similar ideological conflict erupted with Jurgen Klopp. The feud began with a touchline row so heated that police reportedly had to step in. Allardyce's subsequent attacks were personal and ideological. He branded Klopp a soft German, a xenophobic jibe, weaponising the stereotype of hard English football against a foreign philosopher. He then escalated by publicly blaming Liverpool's injury crisis on Klopp's core philosophy, suggesting it was due to the high-tempo pressing game, direct assault on the very tactics that defined his rival's career. These feuds weren't random spats. Allardyce's entire public persona was a culture war. He needed these sophisticated, successful foreign rivals to define himself against. By attacking Benitez's greatest tactical moment and Klopp's core methodology, he was attempting to elevate his own pragmatism above their philosophy. His Inter Milan quote, his cultural pass complaint, these weren't just arrogance. They revealed a deep-seated professional and intellectual insecurity. He believed he was a genius whose work was dismissed as 19th century simply because he was English. But there's a final irony to this career-long antagonism, a contradiction so profound it reframes everything that came after. In the early 1980s, Allardyce was a player at Millwall when George Graham took over as manager. Graham, famous disciplinarian, arrived and began implementing a new, strict regime. In response, Allardyce became a dressing room dissident. He insisted that he would not report teammates who broke Graham's rules. This was an act of rebellion, choice of loyalty to his peers over the new manager's authoritarian demands. The consequences were swift and absolute. Graham immediately froze Allardyce out of the first team. He was placed on the transfer list and allowed to go on a free. Graham agreed to pay Allardyce £15,000 to cancel his contract, a clear power play to summarily execute the removal of a dissenting voice. The man who was frozen out by an autocrat for an act of player solidarity spent the subsequent 40 years as a manager, building a reputation on demanding absolute, unwavering loyalty, not just to the club, but to his tactics, his staff, his man Mark Curtis, his own Big Sam persona. The rebel became the very autocrat he once defined himself against. Players like Ravel Morrison and Joey Barton were frozen out for not falling in line. Ideological opponents like Klopp and Benitez were branded enemies. The dissenter became the enforcer. The 67-day England tenure wasn't an isolated failure. It was the logical and inevitable endpoint of a career built on conflicts of interest, ideological warfare, and a disregard for the rules that he had, for decades, mistaken for strength. Sam Allardyce didn't lose the England job because he was unlucky. He lost it because after 71 years in football, the game finally caught up with him, and the career that began with him standing up to authority ended with him embodying everything he once rebelled against. The dissenter had become the autocrat, and in the end, that contradiction consumed him.